This is J. Krishnamurti's first public talk in Ojai, California, 1966.
I do not know how you regard these meetings. It's really quite a serious gathering, not an afternoon picnic. Or have we gathered to have an amusing time here? Presumably, we have come together to talk over the many problems that every human being throughout the world is faced with. And as we are going to go into it, not only in detail, if there is time, but also to go into it seriously, with a deliberate intention, one must naturally come to these talks and discussions not in any sense of being entertained intellectually or emotionally excited, but rather to go into the many human problems seriously, with a great deal of hesitation and understanding. Then perhaps these meetings will be worthwhile. First of all, I think we should be clear that we are not discussing any particular philosophy. The speaker does not belong to the Orient or to the Occident. He has no particular philosophy or a formulated ideas which one must accept or reject. But what is, it seems to me, necessary is that we should together examine the very complex problems of our lives, the very urgency of these problems. Most of us try to run away from them. Because we do not understand, or escape has become such a habit that we easily slip without thought, without any intention, into these network of escapes that man has cultivated through centuries upon centuries. So what is necessary is to examine unemotionally, not merely intellectually, because the intellect doesn't solve any problem. It can only invent a lot of ideas, theories. Nor can emotion dissipate the urgency of the problems that one has to face and resolve. What is necessary, it seems to me, is a mind that is capable of examination, and to examine there must be freedom from personal views, a mind that is not guided by one's own temperament, inclination, or be compelled by circumstances. And that's quite a difficult task, because we are accustomed to examine everything from a personal point of view, of like or dislike, to certain commitments, to certain philosophies, to certain formulas. And therefore we are always translating these problems according to our particular limitation. But if we would translate or understand these problems deeply and fully, it seems to me that one must look at it not as an individual, but as a human being. I think there's a vast difference between the two. The individual is the local entity, the American. The man who lives on the West Coast or the East Coast or the Midwest. The individual is the Indian and far away, with his outlook, with his limitations, with his superstitions, with his innumerable religions and doctrines and beliefs. The individual is caught in his nationalities by the division of the sectarian spirit, whether it be Catholic or Protestant, or the various nationalistic divisions with their democratic, republican political parties and so on and on and on. That in that frame, the individual exists. But I think the human being supersedes the individual. The human being is, whether he lives in Russia, China, India or America, or any part of the world. Because human beings have the same common factor of sorrow, of joy, of unresolved miseries, despairs, the immense loneliness of modern existence, the utter meaninglessness of life as it is lived now throughout the world, the wars, the continuation of hatred, the racial divisions. The utter despair of life. At that level is the human being, though the individual does partake of all that. But if we merely consider the individual, we shall not inquire much very deeply. It's like cultivating one's own little backyard. And that little to cultivate that little backyard is necessary. But that little land is in relation to the whole of the earth. Upon which man lives as a human being in travail, in despair, in agony, this endless sorrow, this fleeting love, and the ending of life. So if we could consider these problems as human beings, not as an American, unrelated to the rest of the world, unrelated to the vast, hungry East, but rather as a human being with all the innumerable problems. Then perhaps we can intelligently, with care, resolve our problems. And into that we are going together, taking a journey together. When we take a journey, both of us give attention to every step that we take. It isn't that you are listening this evening to a speaker. But rather sharing together whole of life's problems, and to share together the responsibility is yours as well as the speaker. You can't just sit there and be told what to do or not to do, what to believe and what not to believe, or what to follow and so on, which becomes rather immature and rather childish. But to share together any problem, both of us must, both the speaker and you, must not only be alert, attentive, see the urgency of the problems, and give his mind and heart everything that he has to find out, to inquire. Because what we are going to do in all these talks and discussions is to inquire, to examine, and thereby find out for oneself. Because there is no guide, no philosopher, no teacher. No one can lead you, because all that has been tried. There have been teachers, there have been gurus, there have been systems, saviors, priests, little sectarian leaders with their particular idiosyncrasy and philosophies. But all these priests, leaders, teachers, saviors have not solved the human problems of war, of our daily misery, of our despairs, of our innermost agonies and loneliness. They have helped to escape, to bring about some kind of narcotic which will give us some vague hope or give visions of a new life. But actually the change does not take place. It's like those people who take LSD, hoping thereby to escape into some reality of a life, of a great vision, but actually these innumerable drugs or many drugs doesn't alter fundamentally, radically the human mind. So, what we are going to attempt to do is to explore. And to explore there must be freedom. That's the first thing, freedom. To inquire. Which obviously means freedom from any commitment, intellectual or otherwise, from any philosophy, from any dogma, so that the mind can look. And the mind can only look, explore, when it is not caught, for the time being at least, in its own problems, or in its own hopes. It's not committed to any philosophy, to any dogma, to any church. And that's, it seems to me, one of the most difficult things to do. To look attentively at our own problems as a human being demands not only freedom but attention. To attend implies, surely, doesn't it, to give your mind and heart to it totally. With your nerves, with your ears, with your eyes, with your heart, with your mind, to give totally, to understand something. And to give so attentively, totally, there needs to be no motive, no persuasion. Either you do it naturally, because the urgency of the problem is so great that it must be solved. But if you have a motive, and all our urgency generally is based on some limited motive, and therefore our problems continue. So the task for the listener, for you, is very great. Because most of us don't want to solve these problems. The problems of love, death, and how to live. And that's what we're going to discuss. That's what we're going to inquire. Whether it is at all possible for human beings to be totally rid of all despair, which means to be totally free of all fear. And therefore lead a life not in the future, but a life that has not limited by time as yesterday, today and tomorrow. and whether it is at all possible to free the mind from all the centuries upon centuries conditioning. By the propaganda of churches, religions, by the propaganda of society, the whisper of the neighbor, of the magazines, of the newspapers, of the politicians, of the priests, so that the mind is free. Otherwise, man will live everlastingly in pain and misery, sorrow. So we're asking ourselves whether it is at all possible for human beings living in this world, not running away into a monastery or to some peculiar philosophy, or take drugs, because the more intelligent, the more you are aware of the world's problems, the more and they become despair, there is no meaning. And so drugs is a way of escape. And by escape they think that we're going to resolve the problems. On the contrary. So, can we bring about a radical change in our way of thinking, living, feeling? Obviously, considering what the world is, we do. More aware one is of these extraordinarily complex problems, the more one wants a change, one wants a deep revolutionary change. Not at the economic or social level, because they never do really solve any human problem. As the communist revolution has proved, they come after killing millions and millions of people, will come back to the same pattern. But what we are talking about is a revolution at a totally different level. A revolution in the psyche, in the mind itself. And whether it is at all possible to bring about that change, that revolution, not guided by our inclination, by our temperament, or compelled by circumstance, society. One can say that one does change certain amount to a certain degree by circumstances, by influence, through some form of compulsion and an invention. That's going on all the time in our life. Some environmental compulsion makes us, whether we are willing or not willing, to change, modify. But such modification doesn't alter the fundamental issues of life. First, one of the fundamental issues of life is freedom. And that requires tremendous inquiry, intelligence, sensitivity to find out what it is to be free. Revolt is not freedom. Revolt against the present structure of society, which is completely bourgeois, middle class. The revolt against prosperity, going about with long hair, dirty, or all the rest of it. That's not freedom, surely. And we always regard, it seems to me, we regard freedom from something. From despair, from psychological irritation. We always regard freedom from a state to another state, which we call freedom. And if we examine it a little closely, such freedom is merely a reaction. And a reaction invariably produces other reactions. And in that one is caught. And therefore it's not freedom at all. Therefore freedom is not from something, but per se, in itself. One is aware of the utter meaninglessness of life. One may have money, property, live in a comfortable house, 3 meals a day, and all the rest of it. And through all that runs a thread of utter hopelessness, the utter meaninglessness of going to an office every day for the next 40 years. Or for the rest of 40 years cooking and washing dishes. Either one does it automatically, or one is compelled to do it, or one says that's part of life and one has to go through with it. And at the end of it all, life has no meaning, except one has had pleasure, sexual or otherwise. Pleasure looking at the blue sky, the light through the leaves, the stars of an evening, and the movement of water in the moonlight. There is great delight in all that. But that soon passes away and becomes a memory, an ashes. And one wants to be free from this utter boredom of life. And therefore, that freedom is translated into revolt. Saying the young and the older does not understand the younger generation, and so on, and all the rest of that business. Whereas freedom comes not through revolt, it comes naturally when there is the intention, when there is the urgency and attention in examining the social, psychological structure of what we are. To examine as human beings what we are. Because we are the result of a social structure. The society is you, and you are the society. You have built the society according to our particular idiosyncrasies, greed, and all the rest of it. So this psychological structure of what we are is the result of thousands of years of society, of communities, with their beliefs, dogmas, superstitions, with their hopes, with their gods, and all the rest of it. It is that one has to understand and go very deeply to be free from that turmoil of the social structure, this psychological structure of what we are. Unless one is free from that, there will be no escape. You might run away, take to drink, start new religions, LSD and all the rest of it. But unless this psychological structure of what we are, and in understanding that, and there can be understanding only when there is tremendous urgency. And when there is an urgency, there is attention. And out of that comes freedom. And then you can look. Then you can go much further. Then you can begin to inquire if there is any truth. There is something far beyond that which thought has put together. Because man, throughout the historical process, has always inquired. There is something beyond this everyday monotonous routine life. And when he inquired, it was an escape from the daily existence with all its despairs and miseries and conflicts. So when he inquired, it was an invention, it was a projection of his own desires, hopes. And it's only a free mind, and therefore a new mind, that can discover something far beyond that which man, out of his fear, despair and boredom, created, something which man calls God. So our task during these talks here is not to be stimulated, to inquire. If you are relying on being stimulated in order to inquire, then you depend on another. And therefore, you have already committed, and therefore you cease to examine. One inquires because of the urgency. Know what is happening in the world. There's a war. People are killing each other. And there are those who say, this is not my war, my favorite war. I like another war. There are those who justify killing. And this has been going on for 5,000 years. An archaeologist said that in Babylon, on that brick, a man had written that he hoped this would be the last war 5,000 years ago. And man, till now, has chosen war as the way of life. Not only war outwardly, but inwardly. Our life is a battlefield of resentment, hate, conflict, struggle, endless competition. We may deny the outward war. Intelligent people generally do. And when they do not belong to any religion, to any class, to any group, to any nationality, to any system of thought. You may reject outward war, but inwardly we are in battle with ourselves and with another. And that's our life. And that we are incapable of facing and understanding and going into and be utterly free of it. Because that to understand it, to go into it, we are afraid because it may produce a totally different kind of revolution from that what we want. So we avoid. And hence we continue with war. And that's our way of life. And when we talk of love, talk about go to church and all that immature, idiotic stuff, but we continue to live a way that produces wars. To live without war means to live peacefully, without competition, without envy, without resentment. People store resentment and carry on for years. So, if we would bring about a different world, and we must, that's only man's hope, a different mind, a mind that has observed all this, observed how man has divided the world into nationalities, into races, into color, into religions, observing all these inventions, putting them all aside completely. Then only one can live peacefully. Then only you can be perhaps a world where there will be no wars, where there will be no envy. In this country there is immense prosperity. And in the East there is nothing at all. There is hunger, misery. Naturally they are envious. And this self-centered prosperity only will lead to further wars, further misery. The political problem, there is only one, which is the unity of mankind. Not according to democratic or the communist or this or that policy, but actual unity of mankind. All this is not possible when thought is guided by personal inclination and temperament, or compelled by circumstances. What will bring about a radical revolution in the mind? Radical, fundamental mutation of the mind is only possible when we are capable of examining, not at something else but of ourselves, not through a psychologist or an analyst. That will lead nowhere. It may temporarily alleviate certain types of people who are neurotic and so on, but even then that's another problem. To resolve anything, one has to watch without time, to see the thing immediately, and thereby bring about a total mutation in ourselves. I think I've talked enough for this afternoon. Perhaps you'll ask questions. Yes, sir.
If you had to choose between the church and the war, which way you would go?
The question is, if you choose between a church and a war,
Within the church.
within the church,
Here.
oh, I beg your pardon.
Not the building as such, but the church here.
I see. The questioner says, the church within, between that church and war, what would you choose? First of all, we must understand this word choice. I'm not quibbling, please. Where there is choice, there is confusion. It's only the confused mind that chooses. A clear mind that sees things clearly has no choice. No, sir, please, don't pass it off by laughing and being amused by a statement. Because most of us are very confused. Because we have been told so many different things by so many experts, specialists. By the priests, by the books, by religions, by propaganda. We are everything is contradictory. And we are the result of all that contradiction. So, out of that contradiction, out of that confusion, we say, I must choose between this and that. Between this inward church, follow it, sir, right to the end, follow it, sir, and the war. Before I choose, I must inquire, surely, what is the element, the factor that chooses? Who is the chooser? The chooser is the center who says, I will and I will not. I will do this, I will join the war, I won't join the war. And can a confused mind choose? And when it does choose, will not its choice always be confused? Please do listen to this little. Please listen to it. I'm not asking you to agree with me. You know, one of the most difficult things to do is to listen. Because after all, sir, you have your opinion. You have your say this is right. But we're not trying to convince you of anything. We're just examining. We said, okay, a mind that is confused, and most minds are confused. And out of that confusion, to choose only produces more chaos, more confusion. Whereas, if one is capable of looking, I say, if one looks very clearly, with a clear mind, with a mind that is not burdened with personal views, and that's very difficult to be free of personal views, then a mind that's capable of giving its whole attention then there is no choice. then you don't choose between this church inside and the church and the war outside. Then there is only one action. And that action comes when there is no choice at all.
You say that it's necessary for the people to think clearly. How is it possible for them to think clearly when they're not very healthy and they're continually getting sicker every day all over the world, and especially in this country?
Sirs, I have to repeat the question, so would you mind making the question short?
Yes. The people in this country are sick and getting sicker, and all over the world the same. How can they think clearly when they're sick?
Obviously not. Obviously, physical sickness does confuse the issue. But to be physically healthy, you also have to be psychologically very healthy. Mere physical health doesn't solve the problem. You cannot separate physical health from the psychological health. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You spoke of urgency, speaking of freedom. Would you explain further what you meant by urgency?
Would you please explain further, questioner asks, what do you mean by urgency? When we are in acute physical pain, there is an urgency. And you act. There is not all the tremendous intellectual complex motivation and all the rest of it. You act. And the psychological urgency, and that urgency is much more important than the physical urgency, we neglect. We postpone the urgency of a man who is frightened. The urgency to resolve it and to find out it's at all possible to psychologically to be totally free from fear. And that is the urgency. And to inquire into this whole question of fear, is it possible to examine, to find out what is involved in the question of fear. There is not only, which we shan't go into now because it's a very complex problem, fear. In that problem is involved the whole process of machinery of thinking. What brings on fear? Whether it's thought or purely physical danger. So to inquire into it and to resolve it demands urgency. And that's what we mean by that word, urgent. Yes, sir?
Krishnaji, historically there is an urgency at this time. Historically we are coming to the end of an age, the Judeo-Christian age, and we will be entering a new age of man. Now, do you see this mutation that you speak of coming about rather autonomously, if we just don't stand in the way of it?
The questioner asks, there is a mutation, historical mutation taking place, the end of a particular era, Christo-Judaic era, coming to an end, and a new mutation taking place. He asks, what can we do? All that we can do is not stand in its way. That's the question. First of all, I don't quite see how this historical thinking is coming to an end, because the churches are they have got tremendous vested interest. Vested interest in property, but also in each one of us. Because we are frightened, therefore we must, if we may disregard that particular church or that particular group of beliefs, we'll invent our own. Because we are frightened people. A mind, if it is not free from fear, it may see the futility of this particular organization of churches. But because it is afraid, because it seeks comfort, because it seeks various answers for its despair, will invent another. This has historically happened. So our concern surely is not whether certain forms of religious activities come to an end, but rather whether man, human being, can be freed from fear. Totally, right through his being. To go into that, perhaps we should do it next time we meet here, this requires a great deal of understanding, a great deal of opening inquiry, not personal prejudice of fear and hope. Right. Yes, sir.
When there is urgency, fear or some other kind, it demands action. When and at that moment, how is there awareness and action together?
Urgency, question asks, demands action. And when there is action, can there be awareness? Again, those two words, action and awareness, need a great deal of inquiry. What is action? And what is it to be aware? To be aware implies to be aware now of the trees, of the colors, of people, and so on, so on, so on, all that. To externally, objectively, to be aware. And also, inwardly, to be aware of what is going on. One's own prejudices, one's own inclinations, tendencies, compulsions, all the rest of it. To be aware, both outward as well as inward. It's not that I'm aware outwardly and totally unaware inwardly. If I am outwardly aware and not inwardly aware, there's a contradiction. And that contradiction obviously leads to confusion and so on. So awareness is, again, this is it requires a great deal of not only verbal exposition, but also actual experimentation. Because Awareness implies choicelessness. To be aware of a tree, you can be aware of it botanically, with knowledge, with thought, aware of it. But with that awareness, you don't see the whole tree. You don't see, you are never in contact with that tree. You are in contact with the image that you have created about that tree. Or the person you have created in your relationships and so on. One may be aware of that person, but you are actually aware of the image which you have created about that person. So to go into awareness, one has to spend a little time. And also action. Again, that's a tremendous word, so heavily loaded. Most of our action is based on idea, a formula. I have an idea of what I should do or should not do, or an action based upon a technique which I have learnt, and so on and so on. So there is the formula, the idea, and action corresponding to that idea. So there is a division between the idea and action. And to find out what action is, one must ask, is idea necessary at all? So just said, I haven't finished yet. So I have not finished yet, sir, this particular question. Sir, please, if you'll kindly listen, that is, one question rightly asked will answer all the rest of the questions. And also, please, if I may request you, don't take photographs and all the rest of it. This isn't a circus. You're supposed to be serious people.
Question?
One more, sir, wait a minute, sir. I'm not finished yet, this question. You know, sirs, to ask a question is very easy. And one must ask questions endlessly. Because questioning implies certain skepticism. There must be skepticism, not accepting. Which doesn't mean you deny everything. To ask right question is one of the most difficult things. And in asking the right question, in the very asking of it, is the answer. But we never ask fundamental questions. And to ask the fundamental question and to remain with that question not easily find an answer. No one on earth or in heaven can answer a fundamental question except yourself. And to ask a right question demands a great deal of intelligence and sensitivity. which doesn't mean that the speaker is preventing you from asking questions. So we're asking just now, what is awareness and what is action? The action that we know is always based on this formula. First, the idea, the concept, the what should be, what has been, and from that act in approximation to that. This is our life. We are violent. That's an obvious fact. And we have an idea of non-violence. And we're always approximating violence in terms of non-violence. Whereas the idea is idiotic, it's unreal. Non-violence is unreal to a man who is violent. And the understanding of that violence is urgent, immediate. And action of a mind that's pursuing non-violence and yet is violent is merely sowing violence all the time. So what is essential is the understanding of violence. And the understanding of violence is not through non-violence. You have to face it, you have to look at it. And when you know, when you are aware of the whole implication of violence, then it comes to an end immediately. Which means inquiry into the whole question of time. Because we use time as a means of solving our problems and so on. It's not time to go into. So,
would you like to enlarge your thoughts of love that you mentioned several times in your talk?
Question asked, would you like to enlarge on this question of love of which you have talked? Surely, sirs, one will go into it perhaps in the next few talks, but I should have thought you would ask, most of us would ask, I see the urgency of change, radical revolution, mutation in the mind. I see it. It is necessary. How is one to do it? I should have thought that would be the most urgent question. Wouldn't you? Is it possible for a human being who is so heavily conditioned and we know what we mean by conditioning, either as communist, as a capitalist, or as a Catholic, or whatever you will, so heavily conditioned, can that human being radically break down this condition completely? Not in some future date, but immediately. Is it at all possible? it is only possible if you understand first what is the nature and the structure of this condition, the meaning of it. Then also one has to inquire into time. And what is the entity that is going to bring about this change? And so on. These are the problems involved in this. I think we better stop. We've done over an hour. Perhaps we'll continue tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock.